Welcome to This Week in James City County. I'm your host, Renee Dahlman. Today, I am once again joined by Sharon McCarthy. Sharon is the Director of Financial and Management Services for the county. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
It's great to have you back. And of course, as always, joined by Scott Stevens, County Administrator. Welcome, Scott.
Well, thank you, Renee. I feel right at home here talking with you, so thank you.
We've gotten pretty good at this. So
we have.
It is that time of year. We have a new proposed budget that's been released, and we are going to have the two best people on today to talk about it. So everybody will know everything that they need to know about the proposed budget. So, Scott, I am going to let you take it away.
Well, thanks, Renee. I think I do want to introduce this. It's been one of those things we've gone through a reassessment process. We do that every 2 years. That has generated a lot of interest. And so when you talk about the details of the budget, Ms. McCarthy is going to give a pretty good overview, right? We're going to give a pretty good overview. As the residents have questions, we can get you down to whatever level of detail you'd like. And I would just say, so when you say, well, that was a pretty good summary, but where's the other stuff? We can share that as well. It is available on our website, and we can give you that information so you can figure out how to find more and make sure we're answering your questions. I will say we've had a number of residents concerned about their assessments, which has them more interested in the budget than maybe some other years. And just to at least touch on that, I know we're going to talk a little bit in the presentation about it, but we've looked around us. And so what I would tell people, our assessments of residential real estate went up by 21%. That's pretty significant. But in saying that, yours might have gone up 10%. Mine might have gone up 10 to 20. Somebody else's went up 30, 40, some 50%. So it varies by neighborhood, and that's based on the sales going on in and around your home. And so we've encouraged people to reach out to our real estate division. That time has passed, but they still could appeal to the Board of Equalization. So if you think your value's wrong, then I would urge citizens to become involved and appeal the value. When I've asked most of those I've talked with, would they sell it for the new assessment, what they have told me is it's closer. So I don't think we have overassessed in most cases, but that can have a significant impact potentially on the taxes residents would pay when the final rate is determined in the budget. So with that said, looking around us, York County's was a very similar increase in assessments. New Kent County's was a little more than our assessment. So I believe our data is really pretty accurate, but we certainly want to encourage residents to advocate for themselves. In the budget preparation, we're going to touch on a number of things that are driving factors, but a big part is staff. And I'll touch on that as we get further in, but I am really concerned about our staffing. Not that our salaries aren't good salaries, they're just not competitive with a lot of the folks, localities, and others around us. And the turnover that is created really creates some challenges for us in serving this community that this budget attempts to address. And so that's really a big need for what we have. So with that, let me turn it over to Ms. McCarthy and let her take us through.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Stevens. I wanted to start off really just with an overview of the budget process itself. The county does have a 2-year budget cycle. Fiscal year 2025 is the first year of that cycle, and it's the only year with funding actually appropriated for spending. Fiscal year 2026 is the second year, and we show those figures really just to have a broader lens of maybe what's in the pipeline in the next 24 months or so. The budget does also serve as our means of implementing our strategic plan objectives, and funding has been allocated based on those priorities. Our strategic plan has 7 goals. Goal number 1 mainly falls under the purview of our Water and Sewer Authority, which of course is the James City Service Authority. And of the other 6 goals, each of those are presented throughout our budget and in the document itself to make sure that we're really aligning those resources with those priorities. Just to touch on a few of the proposed budget highlights, I did want to mention today's discussion is going to focus on fiscal year 2025. That again is the year that is the proposed budget and the only year where spending is being appropriated. First, for fiscal year 2025, all funds, the total budget is $289.3 million. That's about $40.9 million below the current year 2024 budget. And I want to take a moment to explain the all funds concept. That does mean what it says. It is all funds. So it's our general fund, which of course is the county's main operating fund. But it also includes our capital projects fund and all of the other counties' funds. And it's important to note that because those other funds can create significant fluctuations in our budget from one year to the next. A good example of that would be our capital projects fund, where, for example, we may have a building in one year in fiscal year 2024, but that's not a recurring expenditure. So that doesn't happen again in 2025. And that's exactly what's happened in this case and why we're seeing a drastic decline when we compare this 2025 budget to the current year in 2024. Now focusing in more on the general fund, and again, this is our main operating fund. This is the fund where we tend to have our recurring operating type expenses. And our total general fund budget for next year is proposed at $254.5 million. That's about $23.4 million or 10% above the current year budget. However, it does exclude some additional requests that we were not able to fund, about $8.1 million. And those items weren't funded because we were balancing the budget and we just didn't have the resources. Every year, the estimated cost to provide our reoccurring services always exceeds the projected revenue for that year. So this next slide, again, is walking through our all fund summary. I'd already mentioned that what all that includes. You'll see here the most significant fund is our general operating fund. That's the top item listed there. And right under that one is our capital projects fund. The debt service fund really ties in with capital project fund. This is where we would account for any bonds that we may have to issue and the repayment of those bonds over time. And those bond proceeds are used to support the county and school capital projects. The other funds that are listed here after our debt service fund, those are all of our other funds where there is another primary funding source. So, for example, social services and housing, we receive quite a bit of money in the form of grants from our state and federal agencies, and that's where those programs reside. Again, today we'll stay mainly focused on our operating fund, and that is, of course, the general fund. So focusing in on the revenue sources for our general fund, the county's main funding source for our ongoing operations is our general property taxes. That is your top line item shown here on this slide, and that is mainly our real estate and personal property taxes, and those account for about 70% of our total general fund budget. Couple of highlights on the revenue side. I'd mentioned general property taxes is about 70% of our overall funding. This year, we are seeing about a $23.2 million increase in our projections. The bulk of that is the result of the reassessment. So in real estate taxes, about $21.8 million is from that, as well as overall growth in the county. Also for personal property, that is another primary source of funding for us. We're seeing about a $2.5 million increase there. Our other categories were actually shown a decrease of about $1.1 million. And in the proposed budget, there are no changes to the tax rates themselves that are proposed. Looking at our other local taxes, we are projecting about a $500,000 decrease in that area. That is the area where we project items such as sales tax, meals tax, and lodging tax. That is where we suffered the most during the pandemic, and it's also where we've recovered the most since the pandemic. But we are starting to see our trending either flatline and in some cases some minor dips. That is indicative of what has been projected to happen in the economy. We do tend to follow behind the federal and even the state locally, which can work into our advantage, but it can also work to our disadvantage. And we are starting to see those level off now. In terms of our other funding sources, we are projecting about a $700,000 increase there. Bulk of our funding in that category does come from the state. And in this case, we have built in an increase in reimbursements from the state for the constitutional offices. The state has included a 3% raise for those offices, and this is where we would recoup our share of that reimbursement. We also have made some adjustments to our medic transport recovery fees. And we do that every year as part of the budget process. We want to make sure that we're keeping in alignment with those Medicare reimbursement rates so that we can recover the bulk of what we're due from those insurance companies. And other than that, there are no other program or fee changes, no increases in fees, and no new fees that are being proposed. Switching over to the expenditure side of the general fund, we break our budget down into what we call functional categories, which is really just how we represent the various departments of the county. The largest portion of our budget does continue to be in support of the Williamsburg-James City County school system for operations and also for debt service. The county issues the debt on school projects. And so that debt service is part of our commitment to the schools going forward. Our second largest category is public safety. Of course, this is where fire and police reside, and they make up about 14% of our budget. And so when we look at our budget, just between education and public safety, it's about 2/3 of our budget, about 60% or so that goes to those two areas, which means the remaining 40% has to cover everything else. And that includes, administration, parks and recreation programs, and our own capital and our own debt service on our capital needs. It also includes the funding that we provide to our agency partners throughout the community. So a couple expenditure highlights. I know people are very interested in, well, where is all this money going? What are we doing in terms of investing those dollars? And so we wanted to go through and just point out some of the more significant items. Mr. Stephen had mentioned personnel, and there's quite a few items listed here that is just an ongoing commitment to our staff in terms of various needs. I'm going to start off with our compensation study. That is something that's been in the works for about a year now, and that the funding for that is included in the proposed budget. We also have a 5% raise that has been built in. We have some mandated VRS retirement increases that are included in our budget, and we also have some funds set aside to explore some other opportunities for enhanced employee benefits, such as retiree health care. The other thing I wanted to mention included in our budget is a significant increase to the school division. I'd already mentioned they're about 43% of our budget, and you can see the number one item in terms of new revenue is going to support the school division, about $5.2 million. So that was a significant increase for us, and it's primarily going to also support their staff needs going forward. I also wanted to mention kind of like what we are experiencing. Our partners, our agency partners are faced with the same inflationary cost increases that we are, and we're seeing that in their ask of us for their continued operations. We've also seen that in our curbside recycling program. That recycling program is equipment, fuel, and people, and those tend to be the areas that are hit the hardest in an inflationary state. So I've talked a lot about what's included in the budget, but I think it's equally important to point out what's not included in the budget as well. And this slide captures that $8.1 million of requests that I mentioned previously that are not funded in this budget. It's also probably important to note here, when we say requests, these are requests that have been deemed valid requests. There are always more needs than there is money, and a lot of those things don't even make it into the budget as a request. We vet those things as a group and then through various departments and, of course, county administration. And so what's in here that actually makes it in a request has been deemed a true need versus a nice to have or a want. In terms of allocating the funding to the various requests, I've mentioned the strategic plan, making sure we're staying in alignment with that. We are also making any services that are mandated or deemed essential are given priority as well. And then we're also trying to balance things like staff turnout and or burnout. And if we don't fund certain things, what does that mean for service delivery? Do we have the people to do the things that we need to get done? We also have to factor in delays and what that means in terms of capital needs and maintenance needs and items of that nature. The largest difference here when we look at things that aren't funded is in public safety. And of course, that's where police and fire reside. And public safety is one of those areas during the pandemic where we put off funding a lot of equipment and vehicle needs, the replacement items, not new items, but just maintaining items. And we're seeing that now. We're seeing that, those vehicles are getting some age to them and the equipment is as well. And so we had some significant funding requests to replace those items. And again, it was deemed as a true need. What we're trying to do here is smooth that out, spread it out over several years, as opposed to the one or two that we have in this proposed budget. And then I also wanted to mention the non-departmental area. You'll see there's about a $1.2 million reduction of a request that was not able to be funded there. And that is an effort to delay the implementation of the compensation study, which we've talked about. Of course, that's been going all year, but as part of balancing the budget, we had to look at different ways that we could afford that. And that included curtailing some of the things that were being recommended and also delaying the implementation of that to help us save and balance the budget. Next, I wanted to pivot over and just, really talk about the thing that is on everyone's mind. Of course, that's the real estate reassessments. A lot of this information has already been presented and discussed in previous presentations and podcasts. But just as a quick revisit of those numbers, the results themselves did result in about an 18% overall increase in assessments that include all categories. But the biggest category there, of course, is the residential, and it's highlighted here in red on this slide. And again, you can see about 21.32% was the increase, and that is over a 2-year period. In terms of quantifying that and what that really means to, let's say, the median home owner, that this slide here shows us what the median value of a house was in 2024 versus 2023. And you can see at this latest assessment, it's $411,200. And at the current tax rate, the difference that that taxpayer would pay year over year on an annual basis is about $640. Broken down monthly, that equates to about $53 of additional tax per month. And finally, I know there's been quite a few things that have happened just to bring us to today, but there's still a lot of information to be gained out there. And again, I'm listing the information here of the real estate office. We always encourage you to call and speak with them and speak with the appraiser for your neighborhood. They are the most knowledgeable of your particular property and other factors within your neighborhood that may also come into play. It's also important to go over with them your data. We want, first and foremost, to make sure what we have is accurate. And so verifying the records, checking for measurements and conditions, recorded surveys, those types of things, they're all very, very beneficial. It's the easiest method to make a change. If the data is incorrect, that's very easy to defend. And so we always like to start there. And then also, if we're not satisfied after speaking with the appraiser and validating the information, certainly the opportunity to file an appeal with the Board of Equalization is open through the last day of this month, April 30th. And I've listed here 2 ways to get to that information. The first website link takes you to the real estate assessment page. That has a link to the Board of Equalization, which also has embedded the form itself that would need to be completed. But the real estate office reassessment link also has a bunch of other information that would be very helpful. There's frequently asked questions. There's guides about the process itself. We get a lot of questions about, why is my property this versus my neighbor? And I think those documents are helpful in explaining how it all comes together and how it all comes into play. And so I definitely want to make sure folks know that that's out there for their reference. And then just a few other resources that are available on our website. Obviously, the fiscal year 25 proposed budget document is available now. That contains quite a bit of information. It's about 300 pages. There's summary level information, but there's also the line by line detailed information. One of the items that I think are very helpful to residents are the appendices, which are in the very back of the document. That shows all of the county's various tax rates and fees, and we've summarized it to highlight those that have actually changed. And so hopefully you'll be able to zero in on any changes there. And again, the only change in the proposed budget for this cycle is that realignment with the medic recovery fees. Also, for those that may be interested, obviously the budget is a forecast of the future. We also present our actual data from the past. That's in the form of audited financial statements. Those are also available on our website. And then in terms of just current spending, we post on a monthly basis our online checkbook as well. And so if you're interested in seeing that information, that is readily available as well. And I also just wanted to touch on next steps in the 25 budget process. We've had several meetings and we have several meetings that are coming up as well. The next item that we'll be diving into are our community meetings. There'll be 5 of those, one in each of the Board of Supervisors districts. That'll be over the next 2 weeks, so April 3rd through April 11th. We will also hold a public hearing on the budget on April 9th at 5 p.m. That will be an opportunity to speak both to the tax rates as well as the budget itself. The board will meet as well to discuss the budget on various topics on April 23rd at 1 p.m. And the board is scheduled to adopt the budget on May 14th at 5 p.m.
If I could jump in and give Ms. McCarthy a break, she may have some closing comments or may not, but I think she's done a really great job of giving a high level summary. Like I would say, our intent is to give you enough information and all that you would like to have. So if you get to the website, read the budget document. If you have questions, email, call us. We certainly are happy to try to answer those. The community meetings that we have listed and talked about are really meant to be a much more interactive environment than the board's public hearing. The public hearing is typically one way. Residents are certainly encouraged to come tell the board what they think, but they won't get much of a response at the public hearing. At these community budget meetings, we have one per district. We will have a similar presentation. Ms. McCarthy and I will be at all of those, along with Doug Powell from the Service Authority to present his budget as well. We will be there. It will be a presentation and the interactive ability where you ask a question and we try to answer that question. If we can't answer it there, we will answer it later. But it's what I alluded to earlier. The assessments are up, which means in most scenarios, those that have a higher assessment are going to likely pay more in property tax. And I understand that for many in our community, that is a real challenge. Everything else is costing them more. Can they stay here? The property tax is just one more thing that's going up. And I do worry about that for residents of our community. But I also worry about the future of the county and our ability to provide staff to support what I believe our community needs and deserves from its county staff. And I'll have more examples of that, but I can tell you the turnover that we have had in a number of our departments just makes it hard for, number one, for those of us that have been here to do our jobs, because we're always training new people to do their job. And we've had jobs that have turned over 5 positions 15 times in 3 years. That's a lot. And so you never have anybody really able to help the citizen and provide that level of service. In our financial management services division, it's 30 plus people. We've probably turned over a third of that a couple of times in the last 3 years. And while we're not fully staffed today, we're working on that. But you have to keep people here to get them so they're able to really be productive and helpful to the folks they're working with. And I've got examples through multiple departments to share. We'll do some of that at the community meetings, but that's why almost over $11 million geared towards employees. It really is that important, I believe, for the future of this community. There's almost, another $5 million to our school employees. That is really providing a 4.5% raise, still based on a tentative budget from the state in terms of what that money really will be. But we believe that to be the right number working with the school division. But for them, it's the same thing. It's trying to retrain and recruit staff. And so the other $7 million of this additional revenue and where we've got additional expenses are some of those inflationary costs for the county and some of our capital projects. And again, the community meetings will be a much better place for us to talk through some of that. And then for point of reference, we talk about, could we reduce the tax rate? And that is always an option. We will talk about that. We've been asked that by some residents. The proposed budget does not, because I believed it was important for the community to fund the department's needs that we could. So that's why it remained at the 83. Just to let you know, for our median price house, a 1 cent tax rate reduction provides about $3 a month. So is that significant? I can't really determine if that makes a difference for the average household. On an $800,000 house, that's about $7 a month. So every penny you take off will reduce the tax bill by that amount. For the county, it's about 1 cent on the tax rate is around $1.3 million in new revenue. And so that is something that once we start backing that out, we can put it wherever the community wants us to be. But then our times to get building permits, instead of taking 6 weeks, maybe takes 8. Or our time to return other things of picking up trash or being responsive at our convenience centers or our parks and rec programs, all of those things become more challenging. And then the backside of it, from HR to finance to our computer side, of having capable people in there to really make sure we're overseeing your money correctly, becomes more challenging. And so I believe those risks are real for the county. I know we're experiencing them. And that'll be a big part of these community meetings and our discussion there. I'll turn it back over to Ms. McCarthy, see if she has anything to close us out, but that's, Renee, unless you've thought up any questions for us, I think that's close to the end of me.
Hey, anything else you'd like to add, Sharon?
No, I very much look forward to the community meetings and hearing from the residents and finishing the process.
Okay, well, very good. And as you both have said, a busy couple of weeks coming up. And May 14th is when the board is expected to vote on the proposed budget. So there is still plenty of opportunity for people to reach out to their elected officials and let us know what they are thinking about this great proposed budget that a lot of work has gone into. And I have watched you two be very, very busy over the last months, I think, getting this ready. It is not an easy project, that is for sure.
Well,
But
Renee, we might be the public face, but I would certainly be remiss if I didn't say our FMS staff has really done it behind the scenes, between departments submitting, departments reviewing, all the oversight. It really is a huge effort to get it here. And Ms. McCarthy and I carry the front facing of it, but we have a really good team behind us, keeping us straight and answering our questions and getting the numbers to us. And so I feel very comfortable with where we are. And you're right, it has been a lot of work. We're glad to be to this part and look forward to the next stages in the process.
all right. Well, once again, thank you both so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to come on the podcast and explain the proposed budget to us.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
See you next time.
All right. Well, that wraps up this episode of This Week in James City County. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please be sure to subscribe. That way you will never miss an episode. And also go to our website. We're at jamescitycountyva.gov/podcast. And while there, you're going to find all of our episodes as well as a form that you can give us comments, critiques. We would love to hear from you. And it's also a great place if you have budget questions or things that you want us to make sure that we get answers for you. It's a great place to leave those as well. So once again, thank you all so much, and we will talk with you next week.